Hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk on how to customize your import into the engine using the fairly new Interchange Framework. I'm Flavien Picot. I'm a technical product manager at Epic on the content pipeline topics, so import into the engine, data prep, CAD import, GLTF. I've done a bit of overlooking FBX and USD topics also. So today, what I would like to do is give you some motivations and concepts around the Interchange Framework. Then I want to do two types of demos. One, quite high level, showing how the UI is, the different settings, how to use presets. And then I want to then go a bit more advanced, like how to create blueprints, custom code to actually customize your import itself. And then if we have some time, cover some tips and future plans and Q&As. So the main motivation behind the new Interchange Framework was to, if you import files into the engine, depending on the different file format you're importing, you end up having different codes paths doing similar things like creating assets and everything. So the goal is have a modular framework where most of the imports are going to follow the same frameworks, same steps. Same for like having when you have factories to create your assets, be able to use the same factories for different types of imports. So what we have now is you have the Interchange Framework that does the like orchestrating the import, and then you have like different translators for the different file formats. But then the factories, we try to reuse the same factories. It comes with different benefits. We make it a bit more open, so it's easier to customize it. So change settings for when you're importing, create presets for your import settings. Also extends the existing processes for importing, and even go to the way to like add your own translator if you want to add your own file format support. For us, because it's modular, it's easier to maintain, and that means also it's going to be more stable. If you're importing several files at the same time, if you're doing a batch import of textures, GLTF, things like that, then each single file is going to be imported in parallel, so you get some benefits there also. So far, the work has been focused on the import part, but we are thinking in the future to also use this framework for exporting files. So how it looks like, high level, you will have your different file formats that are supported. When you import them in the engine, you get a translator that is called based on your file format that is going to read the file, get the payload. And then the middle part, this is what Interchange is new now. So from the translator, you are going to get translating nodes that get basically the payloads, the data that has been loaded read from the files. And then this is where we start to call pipelines to process this data, create factories. And then from the factories themselves, you have a path that is going to call the factories to create the assets, and then you get the assets in the end. And the goal is to be able to have access to this intermediary representation of translated nodes and factory nodes, so you can modify the settings or the payload before actually calling factories, or even some steps also after when you have the assets. So if you want to use Interchange, actually, you might already be using it without knowing. The framework is there since 5.1. And like, for example, if you're importing texture, Material X, OBJ, GLTF since 5.1, you most likely have used Interchange. The framework itself, so the management of the pipelines, this is considered production ready since 5.3. Depending which file format we are importing, there's still things that are work in progress. For example, the FBX at the moment is experimental, so it's disabled. You can turn it on if you want to try. The goal is to have the FBX asset import in 5.5 and level import also in 5.5. It's not just a new plugin there. The goal is really to replace the import framework. So you end up having that in our other ecosystem. So UEFN is also using it. You might not have access to the customization because the Unreal for Fortnite editor is a bit more restricted. And the Twinmotion tool is slowly using the Interchange to import some of their format. So what does it look like? So if I import I will import some FBX and GLGF today. So if I'm importing a FBX, where you're supposed to see right now in 5.4, you will get the usual legacy window that you might be familiar with. If you enable the interchange for FBX here, and we are re-importing, you should get this new dialog interchange configuration pipeline window. So as you can see, it's a bit more in line with what we have in since UE5. You get different categories here that allows you to filter the settings. So basically here, what we have is that one pipeline is selected. That's our generic pipeline to import every asset. So things that have like 3D geometry, animation, skeletal mesh, also textures, etc., etc. So you get here all the settings that can be available for this kind of imports. So there are some filters to help you sort out which settings you want that can be useful for you. So for example, there's a filter here that is a filter on content. So here, for example, I'm loading a file that is a static mesh only. So if I disable the filter, I get all the settings from this pipeline that should be able to support animation and skeletal mesh. But if I do filter on contents, the system knows that there's no skeletal mesh in it, so no point in showing you the skeletal mesh settings, so it's going to be hidden. We also made, I will show you later where it is, but you can specify what kind of settings on your pipelines are advanced or basic. So you can also, if you're not very familiar with import settings, you could hide some and just use that to filter them and just have a lower, or maybe the most straightforward settings for your users or for the people that wants to use it to visualize. There's a few other things here. So here is really the settings for the processing of a file and creating the factories, etc. We have put at the moment the translator settings. So you have some options that's purely that are related to the translation part of the file that are at the moment they are there. We are thinking to move them here with the rest of the settings. We have also a little tick box here. This one is if you do batch import of several files, you can specify, does the settings I'm picking here apply to every single file I'm batching import, or will I have a dialog box popping up for every single file that is in the batch? And we have a little preview button here. I will just reset first. So we have a little preview button that allows you to see what kind of factories factory nodes are created, and see what payload the system put on them, which settings have been selected. So here, for example, we can see that we have 2 factory nodes for 2 different for static meshes, one here, with load data mesh count 1. And if I go here and, for example, I look for the combine mesh, so I want to combine all my static meshes. If I hit preview again, then we can see that we only have 1 factory node that has been created, and this one is actually having 2 mesh. So it's a way for you to have a preview of what settings are going to be applied based on the selection you've made here. And then you hit import, and you have some basically updates that shows up here and will pop up into the output log. So where are these settings configured? So if you go into the project settings here you have a big interchange menu here. I'm going to go through some of the settings, but not all of them. And basically, this is where you just define which pipelines you want to apply, depending what kind of file format you're importing and type of files you're importing. So the one we just use is we are doing an asset import, so content folder, no actors created, and this is the assets or 3D model import. So that's our default pipeline. So again, this is the pipeline is defining everything that can happen when we are importing a 3D model into the engine. So you have all the settings possible, and here is an asset. Basically an instance of this pipeline with presets. So if we open it, we have this kind of interface where you can see all the settings that are possible for your pipeline. And here you can customize basically what you're going to see on the dialog import. So you have like, what are your the default settings you want for every property here. You can tweak them. You have visibility things. Is this setting going to be visible on import dialog? Is it going to be visible on re-import dialog? Is it part of a basic advanced layout? And we also have the little lock here so you can prevent the user to actually change the default settings in the UI. So basically you can have options that are hidden, options that are visible but you cannot edit, and options that are visible and editable. Here you have a little arrows that shows you what has been changed, because since we have a class here, the class itself has its own default settings, and here what we are doing is we are instancing and we are doing the preset we want for this particular import. So if we look at where it is, it's somewhere in your engine content. So what you can do is take this asset, you could copy it and put it back, for example, in your content browser. And then you have the asset, and then you can come and change the presets you want to use. So this is what I've done here. And then if you come back to your main interchange window here, you could, instead of using the default asset pipeline, you can come and say, oh, I want to use my project default asset pipeline. So when I'm importing now, we can see that we are using the project A pipeline. I would just reset the default settings here, and we can see that, for example, in this pipeline, I've deactivated recompute normal. I've put I think the combined mesh is enabled by default. So you can, by simply like that, you can change what are the presets that are going to pop up when you're importing. If you don't want to change the default here, I will just reset. You can also do something different where you can here define a new stack that is for your project A stack. And this one you can come here, and we are just going to put back the same one up. So what does it change here in the UI is just so by default, we have the asset pipeline. That's the one that is provided to you by default. But now you have in the drop down here, you can go and pick up the project A settings. So just one thing to notice is that these two different pipelines, they have different presets, but the dialog window is also remembering what is your last sets of settings you've ticked. So sometimes when you switch between these two, because they are the same class behind, you have to click the reset selected pipeline, because the dialog window is also restoring what are the last settings you've set up. So it's something to keep in mind. And you can do other things also, like to continue in your customization. You can come here, you can say, oh, by default, I don't want to see because if we're importing right now, by default, what you see is the default asset pipeline. So the first assets stack that is selected, but you can come here and say, oh no, I want to use my project A default stack. so that if I'm importing my FBX, now it's these settings that have been pre-selected for you by default on import. There's other things you can do. For example, we can just hide the dialog window. So now if I import, you don't have the dialog window, just the import is done to you directly. For those of you that is, for example, I've been looking for the texture settings, by default the texture import dialog is hidden. So you don't have, you should have a dialog window to tweak the different settings when you're importing your textures, but it's hidden. So if you need it, you just go into the settings and you make it visible. So the goal of all of that is that you can by tweaking the presets, creating your own custom presets, tweaking which stack is the one selected by default. Are you hiding it or not? You can, and because these are like project settings and just assets that you carry in your projects, you can deploy to all your teams to use exactly the same kind of preset and making sure everyone is using the same thing. So if I just reset here to default and I'm importing, yeah, just hide it again. So earlier we had only one snake mesh created because it was the my project A pipeline that was the default, and now we have the one with the two because it's the default asset import. One last thing I want to show you here is I'm going to import. Wait, I'm going to show UI again. Just importing something with a skeletal mesh, and I'm going to do a reimport with some conflicts. I want to show some conflicts and also the reimport. So when you import, the assets are going to store what pipeline has been selected when you import it and what settings you've put on import, so that when you reimport a file, by default, you are going to have the one that is going to be selected here in your pipeline stack is the reimport pipeline. So that's basically the pipeline selected on import with the default settings. You can actually redo your reimport with exactly the same settings you've done for the first import. But if you want, you can override them and just change the settings when you're doing your reimport. And here we have conflicts shown here so this is what you're going to get, two different types of conflicts. For example, if you have materials conflicts, they show up here, and skeletal hierarchy conflicts, they are going to show here. That's similar to what you had in legacy. So I'm going to pass these slides because basically it's just what I've been showing you. Just making sure I didn't forget everything. Reimport, we've seen that translator, okay. So we can go into the advanced part now. So a bit more details. If you remember what we spoke about earlier, where you can actually access the import process is at 3 different steps. So you can, on import, you can create a custom pipeline. This is what we're going to do in a moment, where you can either come between the translation of nodes and the creation, modification of factories, so the execute pipeline part. So that's basically your pipeline can come and add new factories, or you can leverage what the previous pipeline have been doing, get the factories we have created, and then come and do modification on the factories that have already been created. Or you can come after the assets are being created, before we call the build on them, or after the assets are being built. And so here, what is important to understand, and we're going to see later, is that how I'm going to work is I'm going to leverage what the engine is. You can write a pipeline from scratch that does every single thing you need, basically reading the translated node, creating all the factories, etc., etc. But the way we are going to work most of the time is we are going to leverage what by default the pipelines give you. Basically, the asset import is going to create all the factories for static mesh, textures, materials, and our custom pipeline is just going to come and just tweak the little things we need that are already there. In order to do that, it's important, this is why I've put pipelines like that. It's important to put your pipeline after, lower in the stack, because the different pipelines, they execute sequentially. So you are going to execute for each pipeline in the stack, you are going to execute all the execute pipeline functions sequentially. Then you go forward, you call the factories, then for each pipeline, you're going to execute the post factory sequentially, etc. So let's do, if you want to do a custom pipeline, you can do it in C++, you can do it in Blueprint, in Python. So I'm going to show with Blueprint. At the moment, it's stored in Blueprint here, but in 5.5, I think we have a menu with all the interchange Blueprint or Python assets store. So that's a normal Blueprint. Parent class is interchange pipeline base. At the moment, we only have one blueprint, and it's a runtime blueprint. That means you cannot call editor functions in it. So you might want to call some subsystem functions when you're doing your import process to do some operation on the assets. So that's not available in 5.4. In 5.5, you will have a different type of blueprint pipeline that is editor. So you can actually call more editor functions from it. So here what you want to do is you have the override functions here, and I'm just going to show two of them, but basically we're going to use the execute one pipeline. That's the one that comes between translation and factory nodes. And the post import, that's the one once your assets are imported. So if we look at what the execute pipeline function does, basically you have a content-based path where you are importing your assets. Source data, it's what kind of files have been imported, what are the file extensions, etc. The main thing we want to look into is the base node container. Basically, this is what is storing all your interchange nodes, so the translated nodes and the current factory nodes. Translated nodes, you cannot edit them. The factory nodes, that's the one we can remove some, add some, modify some. So, and again, because it's going to be a sequential execution, what you get here is whatever you have at the moment where your pipeline is executed. So it's what is important to my custom pipeline you're going to see later. I'm putting it after the main ones. So quickly, here you can do get nodes, get the nodes that are available to you. Here we can look for interchange, for example, the interchange static mesh factory nodes. You get the names to the factories, and that on this one you can go back on your base node container and come and get the actual node itself. So I'm just going to get the factory node up, something like that. And then once I have my factory nodes I'm just casting it back to my interchange static mesh factory node. And here you have, this is where you will have access to properties on the factory. So you will see many of these might not be interesting to access this because you can already have access to that through the settings of the pipeline itself. But just to show that you have access to many properties on the factories, you can enable, disable the node. You can access some settings also. You can add custom attributes on your factory that you can pass to down the line on your pipeline. So this function is called once per pipeline, while if we override let's say the post import pipeline, this one is called for every single actor asset that is being created. So this one is a bit similar. You know, if it's a re-import, you are going to get the asset, current asset that is passed to you, the factory node of your asset, so you can get back information of which factory created this asset, what were the settings on this factory, and of course you get access to all the nodes still. And here you will work more like this. You will do a cast to get, for example, the static mesh itself, and then you will do a filtering based on maybe metadata you've put on the static mesh or metadata that are on the associated factories or on the label of your static mesh. And here you can do operation on your static mesh directly. Another thing here, you can create variables. For example, do I want to customize, does my pipeline has settings? So here I'm just going to make a enable setting. If you compile and go into the class default here, and if you look here, we see something we saw earlier on the assets of the pipeline. So you can have the default values. Is it something that is visible on import, re-import, etc. So I'm not going to use this one. I've made another example. We are going to look at it quickly. So it's similar to what I've shown just now. So I have a bit more settings, values here. So this one, I'm only working on the execute pipeline. I've made two main code. One of them is we are going to get all the factory nodes. And depending on the type of a factory node, we are going to add a custom subpath. So basically, if it's a texture factory, I'm going to add textures in the name of a path of the asset. If it's material instance, adding materials in the path of the asset. If it's geometry, then same custom path here. And here I want to show something else. Here I'm doing another filter based on the static mesh factories. So I'm going to look at static mesh factories based on their label. I'm going to enable or disable the factory. So for example, what I want to do is based on the name of an asset, not actually create the static mesh. And I've made an extra little part here where I'm actually also going to deactivate any factories that is related to my static mesh factory. So to use that, I'm going to show on GLTFs. So GLTF is an asset import here, but because GLTF is slightly different than what we do for general asset import, we have a custom pair translator pipeline here where we customize. If we're importing GLTF, then you should use this pipeline instead. So I'm going to put my custom pipeline here. So the first pipeline here is exactly the same as this one that I've shown you earlier. It's the generic pipeline to import assets into the engine. It's a different asset with a different name because we have different settings, not really different settings, but for example, GLTF import, we don't recompute normals. We have another pipeline here that is doing something very specific for material for GLTF import, and then I just added my pipeline here. And I will add one more that is available, that is the graph inspector. So it's similar to what we saw in the preview. It's just to help you see what are the translated nodes, what are the properties on them. So it's useful when you are debugging your pipelines. So now I've done all of that. I'm going to import a little GLTF here. So we can see we have our list of pipelines here with the default settings. So that's the same one we had before, the generic asset import. Default GLTF pipeline, there's no settings. And then that's my custom pipeline where we have the different variables we've set up in our custom pipeline shows here, and they are going to show depending how you set them up. So here I want to try the create folder option. I'm not going to remove assets based on name yet. If I hit import, because I have my graph inspector, I have this pop-up that shows me all the translated nodes available. So you can see the different nodes. So you're going to have different nodes if it's a static mesh, textures, etc. And we are also all the factory nodes. So we can have a look at, for example, this factory nodes. It's a texture factory node, and then I can make sure, for example, my asset subpath here, I did add these value textures. And if we look at a material, okay, I have these properties that I set up with my custom pipeline is there and it's working. And so if I import, we can see that I have these 3 folders that have been created, and this has been generated because of what I've set up in my pipeline. I can remove. Yep. Just to show if I re-import here and I do not create folders, in that case, I do not have my asset subpath on my textures or on my materials, and if I import, everything goes into my folder, import folder here. Just so we have a look for the next step. So we have a little boat into a bottle here that has a C. So there's some C geometry that I'm going to hide next. And there's some C textures and C material. Oops. So now I want to remove, let's say I'm going to remove the static mesh that has the name C. So if I load my graph inspector, now we can see that these 2 static meshes, you see they're unticked. That means I've disabled the factories. And one benefit of doing it here is that how I would have done it before, that means I would have import all my static meshes and then come and remove the static mesh that I do not need anymore. But here in that case, that means the engine is not even going to create anything in the first place. And if we do filter, we see that the C is not there anymore. Okay. And the last little thing I want to show here. So I'm going to tick this deactivated related assets. It's just more to show what we can do. Here, what I'm doing is that I'm deactivating my static mesh that I've done earlier. And if we look in the properties here, we can see we have something called factory dependencies. And I can see, this static mesh factory is dependent on my on a material factory node here. So I can get this node using the script. I access this one, that's the same factory. I deactivate this one, then again, I get the dependencies, there's some texture dependencies. I access them and I also deactivate them. So now if I'm importing, I do not have materials or textures related to my C geometry. Just again as another example, I've made this little pipeline. So this one doesn't do anything on the execute, so it doesn't touch the the factory nodes. But what I'm going to do is once my import is done and I have my assets, if they are static meshes, then I'm going to use the geometry scripting functions to do a symmetry on my geometry. So I'm accessing all the static meshes. I'm making a dynamic mesh out of them, and I'm applying a mirror mesh operation on them, and then I'm exporting that. So here, depending what I want to do, I can just, for the goal of a presentation, I could just replace this pipeline to just show the new one, or if I need, I can also stack my custom pipeline. So if I want to still remove assets based on their name, but also have symmetry, you can just start to modularize your different functions and then stack them the way you want, reuse them in different pipelines, etc. Again, I come here, I'm importing. I will lead them in their folders. My new modeling tool, the only thing it's doing is there's just one Boolean to say, do you want to apply this pipeline or not? And if I import, here I'm not going to see anything because it's going to do some operations on the assets themselves. So if I import, and if we look at my geometry, we do have the symmetry operation that is being applied on my assets when I imported. If you want to do Python pipelines, you can. We have how I've done it here. I'm not going to show it to you necessarily, but there's you create a Python pipeline. If we look at it, we see that it's something. No, sorry, up. Can I zoom in? We just have you just create a class that inherits, similar to blueprints. You just create a class that inherits from your pipeline base. You define your properties, and then you are going to override whatever functions you want. Do you want to override the execute pipeline one or the post factory import, etc.? Then you just make sure your Python script is visible by the engine in one of the folders that the engine is going to process when you start the project. And here you have, again, it's going to be in the pipeline submenu, but right now it's in miscellaneous. You have an interchange Python pipeline here. So you just create a new asset, interchange pipeline asset, and then you pick this class that is the one that was in the Python script I just showed you. And then you get a little asset here that you can actually come and use into your stack here. If you want to use interchange to actually trigger imports with interchange from blueprints, you can. If you use asset import task, it's going to work also under the hood. Asset import task, if your extension is supported by interchange and interchange is enabled for this extension, then the asset import task is actually going to call interchange. But this is hidden for you. You can call interchange directly, and this is what I've done here. Basically, you just get the interchange manager. You create a source data, that means which file you want to import. And then you choose, do you want to import as an asset into your content browser, or do you want to import as a scene with the actors being created? So here we specify which content path we want to import into. Quite straightforward. And here we have the import asset parameters. So some of them are similar to what you would have on the asset import tasks. A few things that are interesting is that you have the override pipelines here. That means by default, if you don't set up anything, then it's going to use the pipeline stack as you would have used with the import dialog. So it's a GLTF, so we're going to use the one related to GLTF. It's FBX, so we're going to use the default asset import. But you can create your pipelines here. And one thing I wanted to show you, because I already had a question on the forums about that, is if you go on this one, they are here. There's a few pins that are hidden, and one of them is nice because it's a call function, a custom event that is called when your assets are imported. So it's quite nice to enable this pin if you want to do some process once the pipeline has been executed. I'm going into details, but one thing to keep in mind is that because the dialog window is going to remember which settings, where was the last settings. For example, you did some GLTF import, you did some settings in the dialog window. So when you import a GLTF, the dialog window remembers what was your last settings for this pipeline. If you call automation import through Blueprint, it's going to use the default settings of your pipeline. So you have to make sure that your pipeline, for example, is if you want the symmetry, that is the default value is turned on, for example. So what do I have on my pipeline? Just quickly. So we have creating folders, and the geometry should be on. So if I import, well, because I still have my, we should not have seen anything, but because I left the graph inspector in the stack where the graph inspector shows up, but we didn't see any dialog window. And this is my semi-automated folder. And because my pipeline had the one that creates folders, we have the folders being created. And because my pipeline is also using the symmetry, we have a symmetry being created. Okay. So I'm coming back here. This we covered. This also is how to create custom pipelines, the Python, the blueprint import. So some tips and future things. You can use interchange at runtime in a package application at runtime, but of course you have some limitations, like we do not generate nanite at runtime. Your materials import, if it's GLTF, we ship with some material instances, so you get materials. But if you import other formats, some CADs or things like that, you are not going to get nice materials. You do not have the FBX translator at the moment. Also collision, we do not generate collision at the moment. If you're in a package application, I recommend to call the import from a widget and not the level blueprint. We had an issue. It should be fixed in 5.5. The graph inspector is something I just showed you, so I'm not going to go back into it. But if you're making custom pipeline, you've seen it's quite useful to have an idea of what kind of settings or properties you have on the nodes, what is available, and also as you do your pipeline, see how it's modified and see if they are doing what you expect them to do. A quick talk on the visual data prep. For those of you that do not know what it is, it's some visual recipes that it's a tool that has been made more for enterprise people. So when they import their CAD file into the engine, being able to do some filtering on the assets, their actors, and then apply some predefined functions like apply materials, remove some assets, actors, etc. So the long-term goal is going to be able to edit pipelines from this. We'll see how it goes, but that's something we would like to do. What we have done so far is just plug the interchange into this application. So if a format is supported by interchange, for example, FBX level import, you should be able to have FBX import into this visual data prep that you didn't have before. That's experimental. If some of you are interested, the team has made a nice little sample project that is on the online forums. It shows how to make, it shows a blueprint pipeline, C++ pipeline, Python pipeline. It also shows how to have support a custom format. So you have custom translation, custom blueprint, custom factories, a very simple one, but shows all the pieces stitched together. So I recommend having a look at that. And for the future, some of the things I've already covered today, but the UX UI is being reworked. Like the core framework is not going to move so much, but you can expect UX UI being a bit moved around. FBX to be enabled in 5.5. Scene import also being enabled in 5.5. And we are going to start looking at getting asset import for USD with Interchange. And I think that's all for me for today. Yeah, thank you, everyone.